The latch clicked softly as Brennan slipped the bolt into place, the sound echoing in the pre-dawn stillness of London's high-fashion district. Outside, the world was a canvas of grey fog and bone-chilling dampness, but inside the modista shop, the air smelled of lavender sachet and expensive silk. Ivy's fingers trembled as she turned toward the corner of the alleyway visible through the frost-edged window. For 3 weeks, this had been her ritual. 3 weeks of arriving before the sun to perform an act of mercy that could cost her everything. There, huddled against the cold brick, was the old woman. Her spine was curved like a weathered bow, her eyes distant and unfocused beneath a tangle of silver hair that caught the faint lamplight. To the other shopkeepers on the lane, she was a creature, a blemish on the respectability of their high-end establishments. They muttered about calling the watch, they threw dirty water to clear the rubbish from their doorsteps. But Ivy saw something else. She saw a dignity that hadn't quite been extinguished, a flicker of a life that once mattered. "Come," Ivy whispered, opening the back door just a crack. She extended her hand toward the woman who never spoke, never asked, and never even acknowledged the world around her. "Just for a little while, before the master arrives." The woman's fingers were like ice when they found Ivy's palm. She stood with a mechanical stiffness, her body having long ago forgotten the concept of comfort. Ivy guided her into the cramped workroom, hiding her behind the towering bolts of velvet and lace. Ivy had prepared a small kettle of broth, hidden behind the spools of thread. It wasn't much, just scraps she had saved from her own meager meals, but as the steam rose, the old woman's hollow cheek seemed to color, just a fraction. Ivy knew the risks. Mr. Dalton, the shop's owner, was a man who measured morality by the pound. If he found a beggar in his workroom, Ivy wouldn't just be fired, she would be blacklisted from every sewing room in the city. And yet, she couldn't stop. Ivy herself was a girl of the shadows, a seamstress who spent 14 hours a day stitching dreams for women who would never know her name. She knew what it felt like to be invisible. But the shadows were about to be pierced by the most formidable man in England. The Duke of Thorne, Liam Sterling, was not a man of mercy. He was a man of cold steel and absolute order. Known as the Iron Duke, he governed his estates and his life with a rigidity that left no room for error. He had come to the modista shop not for fashion, but for a reckoning. For months, Liam had been searching for his grandmother, Catherine, the Dowager Duchess, who had vanished during a bout of memory loss that had gripped her mind like a fog. The family had scoured the countryside, but Catherine had disappeared into the moor of London's streets, leaving behind only a trail of whispers. Liam's carriage pulled up to the shop just as Ivy was ushering the old woman back into the alley. The Duke stepped out, his presence instantly commanding the street. His eyes, sharp and unforgiving, scanned the area. He saw the flicker of a skirt, the hurried movement of a young woman in the back alley, and the hunched figure of a beggar. He didn't believe in coincidences. The confrontation happened an hour later. Ivy was pinned to the wall of the storage room, the Duke's towering frame blocking the only exit. The air in the room seemed to vanish. "You've been seen, Miss Brennan," the Duke said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "For 3 weeks, you have been smuggling contraband into this shop. My sources tell me you are harboring someone. A thief? A conspirator? Or perhaps something more profitable?" Ivy's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I am harboring no one, Your Grace. I am merely doing my work." Lies. Liam stepped closer, the scent of cedar and expensive leather overwhelming the room. "I saw you this morning. I saw the woman you hid. Tell me who she is, or I will have this shop razed to the ground and you in Newgate by sunset." Ivy looked up at him, her fear turning into a sudden, sharp defiance. She thought of the old woman's cold hands. She thought of the broth she had stolen from her own stomach. "She is a human being, Your Grace. She is cold, she is hungry, and she has no one. If that is a crime, then send me to Newgate. But do not call her contraband. She has a soul, even if the rest of this city has forgotten it." The Duke froze. The Iron Duke, a man who had stared down Napoleon's generals, found himself silenced by a seamstress with flour on her apron and fire in her eyes. He looked at Ivy, really looked at her, and saw a courage that was entirely disconnected from rank or title. "Show me," he commanded, though the edge of his voice had softened. Ivy led him to the alleyway. The old woman was there, staring at a crack in the pavement. Liam approached slowly, his breath hitching in his throat. He reached out a gloved hand and gently lifted the woman's chin. "Grandmother," he whispered. The transition was violent. The old woman didn't recognize him at first, she pulled away with a whimper. But Liam didn't pull back. He sank to his knees in the filth of the alley, his expensive wool trousers soaking up the mud. He spoke to her in a voice Ivy didn't know a man could possess, soft, pleading, and broken. "It's Liam, grandmother. I found you. You're safe now. I'm taking you home." The realization hit Ivy like a physical blow. The creature she had been feeding was the Dowager Duchess of Thorne. She had been harboring royalty in a storage closet. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of scandal and transformation. Catherine was returned to the Sterling estate, her health slowly mending under the care of the best physicians in London. But she refused to eat unless Ivy was the one to bring the tray. She refused to speak unless Ivy was in the room. The bond forged in the cold workroom of a modista shop was stronger than any blood tie. Liam found himself in an impossible position. He was a duke who owed his grandmother's life to a girl who lived in a rented room and sewed buttons for a living. He tried to pay her off, offering a purse of gold that would have supported Ivy for a lifetime. "I didn't do it for the gold, Your Grace," Ivy said, standing in the middle of his grand library, looking small but unbreakable. "I did it because she was hungry. Keep your money. I have my work." "Your work?" Liam paced the room, his frustration mounting. "You were nearly arrested. You were nearly ruined. And you refuse a reward? What kind of woman are you, Ivy Brennan?" "The kind who doesn't need a duke's permission to be kind," she replied. Liam was obsessed. He began to visit the shop, not to see his grandmother, but to watch Ivy. He watched her patience with difficult customers, he watched the way she worked until her fingers bled to meet a deadline. He saw an ability in her that put the ladies of the ton to shame. He realized that for all his power, he was the one who was impoverished. He had a title, but she had a heart. He had land, but she had a soul. The Duke of Thorne did the unthinkable. He didn't just invite Ivy to the estate, he courted her. He braved the whispers of the aristocracy and the fury of his peers to stand by the side of a seamstress. He realized that his grandmother hadn't been the only one lost in the fog, he had been lost in the coldness of his own life. The final confrontation happened at the Thorne Winter Ball. The elite of England were there, waiting for the Duke to announce his engagement to a suitable heiress. Instead, Liam walked to the center of the ballroom and took the hand of a woman dressed in a gown of her own making, a gown of deep emerald silk that outshone every diamond in the room. "I spent my life looking for order," Liam said to the hushed crowd. "But I found that order without kindness is just a cage. I found my grandmother because of a woman who was brave enough to care when it was dangerous. And I found myself because of that same woman." He turned to Ivy and sank to one knee, the Iron Duke finally melting. "You fed a woman who was hungry, Ivy. Now, I am asking you to feed a man who is starving. Starving for the kind of life only you can show me. Will you be my Duchess?" Ivy looked at Catherine, who was smiling from her seat of honor. She looked at Liam, the man who had traded his armor for a heart. "I don't need a title, Liam," she whispered. "I know," he replied, his eyes brimming with a warmth she had sparked. "But the title needs you." The marriage of the Duke of Thorne to Ivy Brennan was the scandal of the century, but it was also its greatest triumph. They transformed the Sterling estate into a sanctuary for the forgotten, ensuring that no one in their lands would ever have to huddle in an alleyway again. Years later, Ivy would sit in the garden with Catherine, watching Liam play with their children. She would remember the click of the latch and the smell of the broth in the cold workroom. She realized then that being enough wasn't about the silks she wore or the title she carried. It was about the simple act of showing up, of choosing love when it was scary, and of realizing that sometimes, the most royal thing you can do is hold the hand of someone who has lost their way. The end of the story wasn't just a wedding, it was a beginning. A beginning of a new legacy for the House of Thorne, a legacy built not on iron, but on the enduring, unbreakable power of mercy.